Somehow humanity has come out of COVID-19 crisis. But we have something catastrophic to face.
How fast is climate change happening?
Europe is facing a kind of summer it has not seen in at least 500 years.
The Greenland ice sheet covers around 80% of Greenland's surface. It is close to its melting point.
Ignoring climate change amounted to collective suicide.
It's happening too fast.
Almost 6 lakh hectares in European Union.
Twice the size of Rome got burnt in the wildfire.
And to make the scenario worse, there's an official report on water deficiency, wherein 60% of the Europe is in danger of droughts, and this makes the fighting the wildfire more difficult. UK Health Security Agency declared a level 3 heat wave alert. The government wants Britain citizens to stay hydrated and have air conditioning.
Think about Alaska.
This beautiful country, lying next to Canada, known for its springs, has a wildfire which swept more than 3 million acres, making life harder for firefighters and government to allocate resources that can set off this fire. Right now, countries across Africa, including Kenya, Nigeria, Ethiopia and Somalia, are facing the worst food crisis.
That was never seen in last 40 years.
Because these countries have no trace of rains in recent years. Literally 117 million people are now struggling to eat. Pakistan and South Korea are suffering from serious floods. These countries have never been through such floods in last 80 years. California is going through forest fires and heat waves. North Mexico dams have dried up. Amazon rainforest is burning. Arctic is heating up 4 times faster than the rest of the world.
What are governments doing about all these catastrophes happening on a global scale?
A climate policy by Biden administration is centered on a promise made in 2021, and it is to reduce US emissions by 50% by the end of 2030. To achieve this target, US is ready to adopt renewable energies, sustainable industries, and millions of job creation to focus on making this happen. And you know what? In reality, 63% of the current carbon emission is from developing nations. And ironically, since industrial revolution, developing nations contributed only 8% of the entire carbon emission. We, the developed nations, are worried about our GDP and development, and hence we burn fossil fuels to run our economies. And there is nothing wrong in doing so. To be very clear about this point, this is what developed nations have been doing in the initial periods of industrial revolution.
So ultimately, for a developing country to be a developed country, it has to burn fuels.
If they don't, their economy would simply collapse, just like in the case of COVID-19 crisis. So this proves that developing nations are helpless. They have no other option except to burn fuels and emit carbon.
Yes, nations like India need to develop, but at what cost?
That's where the concept of sustainable development comes into picture.
Sustainable development is a way of human development while also maintaining the ability of Mother Nature to provide natural resources,
on which the country, economy and society depends. Developing nations require so many changes in the infrastructure, as these nations need to build their economies around renewable and green energy in order to walk in the path of sustainable development. And as we clearly know, developing nations would spend money on their own development rather than focusing on environmental consequences. Which is true. Why will India spend so much funds to convert itself from a carbon emitting economy into an economy that runs on green energy, when people of this country are dying of poverty?
Developing countries are not spending on infrastructure, then who will?
Unlike the rest of the developing nations, India is actually working on the issues of climate change. And the best part is that Indian government blames developed nations for their colonization and also getting the globe into this situation. Hence, India is demanding developed nations to provide carbon funds, wherein these funds will be used by developing nations for their infrastructure required to make sustainable development possible. It is actually great that India is representing the developing nations and demanding developed nations to pay for their infrastructure. While we can have a dedicated video on how India is influencing geopolitics and what exactly it is demanding from developed nations, we'll stick to the topic of climate change for this video.
How are scientists looking at this current climate crisis?
They think this world can handle the climate crisis the same way we handle the COVID-19 crisis. Just look at what humanity has done with our previous crisis. To stop the contamination of virus, we came up with lockdowns and tried our best to roll out vaccines as soon as possible to make ourselves immune from COVID-19.
This process is called eradicating.
But our vaccines are not that efficient, so we couldn't eliminate COVID completely from this world. We have no other option, so we accept this new normal and live along with COVID-19. And in future, there is a higher probability that we might get immune of COVID-19 naturally. This process is called adapting. With the knowledge from previous crisis, let's see what we can do about the climate crisis. First, we try to reverse the effect of climate change by building infrastructure that can reduce the amount of carbon emission in the atmosphere and can lead us to sustainable development. To make reversing possible, we actually need to put in too much of efforts, which at the moment requires a lot of time and money. Or else, we can adapt to this new normal of extreme weathers. Every government around the world is taking some sort of measures to actually reduce the carbon emission. We might not bring carbon emission down to absolute zero, but we instead reduce the dependency on carbon fuels so that we don't touch the threshold value of carbon emission. So scientists around the world are much more into adapting this crisis rather than reversing it, simply because reversing requires a lot of time.
Why should you be worried?
In our previous crisis, we have seen who has struggled the most, the poor and the middle class. How? People had no jobs and hence no food to eat during the COVID-19 lockdowns, and no proper treatment for COVID-19 in government hospitals. And even in climate crisis, the poor and the lower middle class are gonna suffer the most. How? These people won't have food supplies, place to live when the disaster hits, and also their income sources get affected even after disaster fades away. At this moment, under the name of development, we are digging a grave for ourselves. And the worst part is, there might not be a single flower to bloom on our grave. Every small step from every single person on this planet can walk us towards sustainable development. That's it from Team Rationals. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel.
Team Rationals makes content that's a must watch for people.
Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.